the key to luminosity is keeping values close.
Hmm.
While around it we may have value contrast or other contrasts too, but and you can train your eye. I'm gonna hopefully this workshop will train your eye because that's what it's designed for. It's to train your eye to hone in and see those subtle differences.
The study of creating luminosity includes how to create shimmering color within our paintings. To do this, we have 4 major technical maneuvers for creating luminosity. That simply means that we have some technical skills that we can apply. The 2 major painting skills we need are knowing how to do gradating and knowing how to do contrasting. Creating luminosity depends upon gradation of hue and the gradation of the value of hue. It depends also, a different kind of luminosity, on the gradation of saturation and the gradation of value of saturation. It also can be done with contrast of hue and the contrast of the value of the hue. And it can be done with contrast of saturation and the contrast of the value of the saturation. So how do we know these things? How do we know that creating luminosity requires these particular skills? Well, let's find out. Here we have something in nature. We have a sunset. We have a section of the sky where the colors have been formed by the atmosphere and light at the time that the sun is beginning to set. So let's analyze this and find out, do we have gradation of hue and value? Do we have gradation of saturation and value? Do we have contrast of value and hue? Do we have contrast of saturation and value? Let's begin right here in the center. And we'll pull over the color reader. I'll just park it right here for the moment. And let's just read this little section. Okay, what do we have in hue? We have orange. We have a high value, a very light value, a full saturation, almost full saturation of a light value of orange. That's information. All right, now if we move the reader, the little spotter, over just a little bit, what do we have there? Well, we have that orange changing in value. It's hue changing in value. Now, if we keep moving it, we see now that that hue has changed more towards red. You see it right here. You can go to the middle, let your eye go over to the middle of the reader, and that will show you the hue. This shows you the value of the hue. This little dot right here will show us the hue and its saturation. So we see the saturation right here beginning to change a little bit. Now we're seeing a fluctuation of color. We're seeing the organic nature of color, where we're finding all those 3 notes of color playing together. Now, if we continue to move and we move over into this area, we'll see that the hue changes a little bit more towards violet. On the reader, it jumps over to this side because the reader is not set to go all the way around as we see on a normal color wheel. But it's not only changed in hue, it's changed in saturation. This little dot has dropped down just a little bit, but it stayed pretty close in the same value range. So we see right in here, we see gradation of hue, we see gradation of saturation, and we see the values staying pretty much in the same degree, same light area. And we see now as it continues to move in this direction, we see, well, let's move it right in here. Does it change any more? The saturation is changing just a little bit. Now, if we continue to move, you see the saturation changes even more. The value staying the same. Is the hue staying the same as it is right in here? But we see the saturation changing. And you see this little dot right here moving in this direction towards this part of the arc. You know the saturation is changing. That's what the beauty of computer. It shows us in front of our own eyes what the analysis of what our eyes are registering. And then we continue to move in this direction. We see, and we would keep going in that direction. We'd continue to see changes. But now we've seen already the beauty of this shimmering, this luminosity is caused by the gradation of hue and the gradation of saturation within the same value range. Isn't that beautiful? Now we see something beginning to happen right here. You see this slight change in value right there? That's contributing to the luminosity of the whole piece as well. And so what we're having here is a slight value change. You can see it right here as this little dot jumps from as it moves in this direction, it gets darker, this direction gets lighter, and we see it jumping there, which shows us that now we're getting just a slight minor contrast of value. But the hue and the saturation, well, now what's happening in here? The hue is changing just a little bit. The saturation is pretty much remaining the same. You see as I move back and forth. Now let's go right up here and see what's happening. So we've got right in here, let's register that. What do we have? We have that red, that's still in the red range right here. See, this is the red range right here. It's a low intensity red. Where are we? Right here. It's a low intensity red. It's a light value red, but as it moves into this area, the value gets darker. So we've got a contrast right here. We've got gradation right here, and we've got value contrast, where the value is contrasting, the hues remaining the same, the saturation changes. In fact, we've got saturation doesn't move a whole lot there. It moves, yes, it does. Saturation does move considerably there. So the saturation changes the contrast. So we've got contrast in saturation and contrast in value, both going on right here. Now let's move to let's move to an area right here and see what's happening in this area. So we'll start right here. All right, we're in the red range. We can see right here, we're in the red range. Where am I? Right here. Okay, right there. We're in the red range. We are in, well, you see that red fluctuates between the red and sort of the red-violet. So that's what's going on right there. It stays, the saturation and value are staying the same, and the hue is changing right there. Let's move it down here, and look what happens. The saturation jumps. The value stays pretty much in the same range. Well, the hue is moving just a little bit. But when the saturation jumps that much, we have a contrast of saturation right here, right there. That contrast of saturation causes that shimmer. Now we can go into one other place, and this particular subject will go down to something that's a little bit more extreme right here. Now look what happens right here. This is reading in the orange range. We see the orange right over here. See, there it is, orange. Let's go back and read it. Okay, that's reading in the orange range. It is in the high value, it's a high value orange, a relatively high value saturation. Now, if we think of saturation in terms of percentages, which is one good way to read it. This is about 90% saturated orange. But let's go right here and see what we have right beside it. Now, these two are contrasting. There's not gradating right here, there's contrast. But that contrast is helping cause that shimmer, that luminosity. So if I read this one, look at what happened. It shifted over towards the violet right here. We see it shifted over towards the violet. It shifted dramatically in saturation. We only have about, I would say, maybe 10 to 20% saturation there. We can still read it as red to shifting towards violet. And the value shifted. Value didn't shift that much, but it shifted just enough to cause that contrast, that feeling of contrast. So just in this one scene, this one little section from this sky, we have gradation of hue, and we could go all through. We're not going to take the time to go through all of this. I just want to get you started thinking in this direction. But we have gradation in hue, we have gradation in saturation. Yes, and we have the gradation in the hue and value together. We have the gradation in the saturation. We have the contrast of hue and contrast of saturation. So you see how knowing how to read gradation and saturation of hue is the key to knowing how to create luminosity in our paintings. Let's pause just a moment here and investigate our methods for reading what color can do. Now, we have the color wheel, which is a wonderful tool for working color out. The color wheel does not give us value readings, though. In fact, the traditional color wheels will only give us the hue readings as they move around the edge of the wheel. This is one that I developed that gives us both the hue reading as it moves around in either way, either direction, and the saturation reading. Now, saturation we refer to also as intensity, and some people call it chroma. For many, many years, I used the term intensity, but I'm using the word saturation more and more because I think the word itself better tells us what's going on in the hue. And one way we can distinguish that in our language is to think of it in terms of percentages. Now, this is just a general way of talking about it, but it has to do with how much of the hue remains in the color when its complement is added to it. And that's what we mean by saturation. So the hue at its 100% saturation is the highest saturated hue, or highest intensity, or highest chroma, however you want to say it. Put a bit of complement, say put in essence about 20% of its complement into it, and that reduces it to 80% saturation. That's a general figure now, it's not exact. You could say 80-ish. It's a general percentage. And then as the more complement that gets added into that color, the more the saturation reduces. And then when it reaches that point where we can't see any hue in it anymore, it is fully neutral, desaturated totally. Value can change in every one of these saturations. We have within the highest saturation, we have the broad range of value from the darkest dark to the lightest light. Now the trick there is as the value gets lighter, it does get somewhat desaturated. So you might say that you desaturate hue by either making it lighter or making it darker, because it can't retain its full saturation when it's either darkened or lightened. And we see that in nature, and we can interpret that in nature. But what I want you to remember is that in every degree of saturation, we have also the full range of value. So we have a full range of value in this saturation, in this one, in this one, in this one, and even in this one. I say this over and over again. I've said it in other courses. I've said it in the quick tips. I've said it in your weekend tips. Color is a chord. Any color, any single color is a chord of 3 notes. The degree of saturation, the degree of hue, the degree of value. And that's what we're playing with when we're creating luminosity. So when we say that a hue is gradating, we're talking about one hue moving into another. Yellow gradating towards orange, or yellow gradating towards green, or any of the hues gradating towards another hue. That's what we mean by gradation of hue. When we say gradation of value of any hue, we mean the gradation of that hue getting lighter or getting darker. When we say gradation of saturation of that hue, we mean the gradation of the percentage of saturation. And then with each saturation, then we can say can be gradated in every value, towards every value, from dark to light or light to dark. When we say contrast of hue, we're talking about differences in hues and the degree to which they are different. When we say contrast of value, we're talking about differences in value and the degrees to which they are different. When we're saying contrast in saturation, we're saying differences in saturation and the degree to which they are different. So that's what we mean when we're talking about this whole business of creating luminosity. We are manipulating all of these characteristics of color, and as artists, we manipulate it. All scenes in nature can give us luminosity. In this span of time we have for this study, we cannot explore every single subject, but what we can explore is the principle and how it works. That will then enable us to find it anywhere and to create it anywhere. So let's look at these fall leaves, and look, we can find the same characteristics in these fall leaves that we found in the sky we looked at earlier. So let's bring the color reader over and examine just certain areas and look at what we're changing. I'm going to pull this right over in here because I want to examine just this cluster right here. There is luminosity here. We feel that luminosity in the fall leaves, but let's look at what's causing it. Now, if we can just, I want you to watch the color reader is going, these little dots in the color reader are going to jump as I put my little stopper here, or my little locator on various parts of the fall leaves. But you see this little area right here, look at how little it jumps, and yet we feel that, especially in this area right in here, we feel that luminosity coming through. So if we start right here, we can see that the hue is right here on yellow orange. You see it right there. That the value is right in the just a little lighter than what we would consider middle value, right there. The saturation looks like about 60%. It's kind of halfway between fully saturated and fully neutral. And that's that area right there. Now, if we move down, we can see across here, it varies just a little bit in value, you see, but the saturation and the hue, well, the saturation may vary just a little bit too. The hue remains the same. And so if we were painting this, we wouldn't paint it with just one brushstroke of color, but we would vary in one brushstroke, then vary the amount of saturation that we'd pick up in the next brushstroke, vary maybe the amount of value you'd pick up in the next. That's what we mean by varying the color and getting that true feeling of the dimensionality we feel in that saturation. So we see this is a very subtle gradation of very subtle changes in here. But right here, we see a little bit of contrast, just a little bit of contrast in value and saturation. Now watch. You see the movement here. Keep your eye on this one right here. When I move it down in this area, you see it jumps a little bit in value, about an interval in value. And then I move it back in here. Look at the saturation right here. Now watch. As I move it back down, see that saturation changes. So there we have a contrast in saturation and value. So look at what we have right here. In this particular area, you see we've skipped up, we've jumped over to the yellow. The hue has changed from yellow-orange here over to yellow. Well, it's changing very gradually. We see the gradation in that change happening right here. You see that it's gradually moving from yellow-orange over into yellow. Now, it's highly possible that those leaves are the very same color, the very same, are in the very same color range. It's the change in light that is causing us to see them as, especially the dvalia and the saturation. The change in color, or the change in light, will cause that. When it's in shadow, we're going to see this. When the light hits it, we see there. So that's why it's so important that we're able to distinguish what's in shadow and what's in light, or what's not in shadow. So we can see that comparison right there. Now, as we come down right in here, we see kind of a repetition. We see this theme continues to repeat itself. In this area right here, we'll see that those subtle changes in hue, not in hue, hue stays the same. We see the subtle changes in value and, well, that keeps jumping, value and saturation. But then it jumps right here, we have a contrast. This is gradation, this is contrast. Here we have the contrast, and the contrast then jumps. Let's see, what does that contrast do? Yeah, it jumps over into the yellow. You see there, it moves very slightly. It's still very low saturation. We'll come up here with the light shining the brightest on it, and look at that. Jumps into that highly saturated, very light value yellow. Now, another thing that's influencing how we see that is in the negative space here. The blue that we see through, the sky blue that we see through this, is also influencing how this color appears to our eyes. Now, I want to do a little experiment for you here. I want to show you, if I take this away, I want you to watch how this changes. Now, I want to read the shadow area there in this particular hue, value, and saturation. Now, and if I then use that same color right like this, just take that away. Now, do you see? Do you see what happened to this? You see how this doesn't feel quite so luminous anymore? Yes, we still have the contrast, but you see the difference now. I take away the blue, and why is that? It's because that blue is a complement of orange. Blue enhances that yellow-orange that we're seeing. Now I'm going to take that away, and there you are. Let's go to one other area in this one. I want to go down into this area where we see a little bit different hue creeping in, right in this area right here, where the hue actually changes. It's the hue in the leaf, I believe, that actually changes there. And you can see it goes more towards yellow-green in this area, and it hangs in closer to the actual yellow in this area. Now, what do we have there? We have a contrast of hue. It's a close contrast. Got a little bit of blue in it. The yellow has a little bit of blue in it. It makes it go over to green, which is a different color from yellow. And therefore we have a close hue contrast of green and yellow. The contrast right there. What do we have in value? Okay, we'll read this value. You see it's hovering about right here. We read this value, and it's right in that same, it changes just a little bit in that value range. So we see the darker value, the change in hue. It was just about an interval change in value. Darker, slightly darker value, slight change in hue, contrast with the yellow here, or actually it's more a little bit more towards the yellow orange of a lighter value and a little higher saturation. So this is what we watch for, and these are the kinds of things that we can manipulate or maneuver when we're working with the whole concept of luminosity. It's those changes that create the luminosity and how we manage those changes. Now, I want to show you now how we can take a subject that has no hue in it, or practically any hue in it, show you how we can discern what we can do to create luminosity in that subject. Okay, so this is, I love winter scenes, and this is a winter scene. This is one of my pieces, and this is a winter scene. You can see hardly any color, hardly any hue in this at all. If I read, let me pull the color reader over and show you. I'll just put it right here. Well, no, I'll put it so you can see the whole, let's pull it down here. Okay. Now, if I go up in this area and you see I'm hitting the color reader, and you see this saturation right down here, you see it is totally, pretty much totally desaturated. We can't discern any hue or very little hue, if any, there at all. We see value changes, you see right here, we see value changes, but as I move that reader around, we don't see the hue. The hue is just not there. And that's the reason a lot of people get depressed in the wintertime, especially people who live in areas where there are lots of deciduous trees. When all the leaves fall and we have nothing but the gray tree trunks, and very especially where they're deep forest, we don't have any color. We don't have any hue. We have lots and lots and lots of neutrals, very strong neutrals. Even in the tree trunks, you see there how very desaturated there is. Lots of value change, but no hue, and no saturation change, and no hue change, or very little hue change. We are lucky enough occasionally to get some evergreens that can give us a little bit of hue. The camera didn't register this very much, but we see get just a little bit more of the green. Well, the camera is really showing that much and much more desaturated. We see a little hue popping up here in the road. We can see we get because of the color. It's very, very desaturated. Now, so what my challenge here, as something I really love doing, is taking a winter scene like this and pushing it into just a little bit of saturation where I'm using the gradation of the saturation, the gradation of the hue, some cases the gradation of the value. And I'm also using some of the contrast of the saturation, a little bit, not very much. It's mostly contrast in the hue and highly contrast in the value range. So let's pull this over, and I'll just put it right over here in my painting. I'm going to go through just a little bit and let you watch what's going on. You can see some color coming through here. See some hue coming through here, where you don't see hue. And pull this down, where we don't see hue coming through here. And this is a little game I love playing with my paintings, especially in very, very desaturated subjects such as winter scenes or rocks in the river or things like that. And it's fun to do. It's really fun to do. So you see what's going on up here. Now, if I pull the color reader over so you can see, I'm going to go in this area and show you what's going on there. You see, it's really, really desaturated right up in here. But you see the saturation is jumping. Now, if you look, I'm working there in a very low percentage. I'm working no higher than maybe about a 20-25% saturation. And you can see this little thing kind of jump just a little bit as it moves up and down here. As I move that reader, you can see it gets a little closer there. See it moves up just a little bit, moves up into saturation just a little bit. Move it around, it moves up. But you can see it's reading, the color reader is reading these warm colors and the cooler colors. And I'm also very conscious of that I'm working, there we go, I'm working in the greens in a very low saturation, and I'm working in the red oranges here in a very low saturation. But the value is very much the same. Now watch this right in here. This is where I'm keeping the value, just gradating very slightly. Very slight value difference, very, very close value range. And that's what's causing it to work. That's what's causing the saturation or the hue saturation. The saturation in the hue, where I've got two different hues, red, orange, and greens. These greens are in the more blue greens. Red, orange, and blue greens. They're sort of complements of each other. They've got complementary colors in them. And I've been keeping them pretty much in the same value range and in the pretty much the same saturation range. Have them just saturated enough so that they are enhancing each other. And then I get that contrast. It's not muddy because the value of contrast is so strong. You see right here, I have a real strong dark right here. I have real strong darks right here. Strong dark here against a light there, or lighter. That is what you call a moderate value contrast. And because of this contrast, now here I'm contrasting hue and value, here and here. Down here, I'm contrasting mostly value. It's pretty much in the same hue range, but I'm contrasting mostly value. And strong intervals, I've got about 5, 6 intervals between this dark and this light. Over here, I only have about 3 intervals between this dark and this light, but that's all it takes. So what really makes the painting come alive is two things. It's that gradation back and forth, alternating the alternating the warmer against the cooler, and keeping those values pretty much the same. I'm alternating the saturation. When I say warm, cool, I'm talking about the hue. The red orange is more warm, the green is more cool. And so I'm alternating those in gradation, blending them one into the other, and kind of alternating. I got a warm, cool, or red, orange, blue, green there, and then I go back and pick up red, orange to blue, green here, and so on. And then right over here, I gradually work this into just very soft edges there, into this light, which helps to illuminate the whole scene. And then you see here, I'm gradually getting lighter in value. If you come over here, you can see it in there. As I'm moving in this direction right here, I'm working more in the gradation of value, catching the light, working more in the gradation of value to show this. So we've got contrast of value, we got contrast of value here, and then we have the gradation in there. So you can see how that can be such a fun project to find something that is totally neutral, has no hue in it, and add just enough hue into it. And sometimes it's fun just to see how far you can push that. How much saturation can you give that hue and still have it feel like that winter scene? So maybe I've given you enough to think about now.
To a degree, when you're using neutrals to desaturate, it will desaturate and you can make luminosity work, but only to a degree. Now, my experience is that you have the fuller opportunity for desaturation if you're thinking about two hues that are complements, say blue and orange. Or say, so we're using blue and orange. Let's say it doesn't matter what value, just using blue and orange. I then have the capability to move the saturation in from orange to neutral as well as from blue to neutral. I have that full capability. So if I want luminosity, if I want a luminosity that changes both the hue and the saturation within the same value range, I have that capability. Be sure and view all of our quick tips. And while you're doing so, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell so you'll always get a notice when we produce a new quick tip, which is every week. And if you have a question, leave it in the comments section and we'll make a quick tip for you. Also, take a trip over to DianneMize.com where I have full-length lessons, downloads, DVDs, lots of other stuff there, some free stuff for you. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the newsletter, and that way you'll always be informed every time we do something new.